Okay, so everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're heading into territory that's, well, kind of feels like staring into the future. Artificial General Intelligence, or AGI, as it's usually called.
And it's a topic that goes way beyond those, those headlines about robots taking over everything.
100%.
Yeah.
And we're starting this deep dive with something even more fundamental. What actually makes AI general? Trust me, it's way more complex than you might think.
Oh, yeah. It definitely challenges those classic sci-fi tropes,
Yeah.
the whole all-knowing AI thing. The reality is, well, a lot more interesting.
Exactly. So to navigate this whole thing, we're turning to some pretty serious research. A paper with a title that sounds like it's straight out of a computer science exam. Levels of AGI for operationalizing progress on the path to AGI.
Catchy, right?
Yeah, it's super catchy. But don't worry, we'll break it all down.
And what's really cool about this paper is that it doesn't just try to define AGI, it actually lays out a roadmap for measuring it, which is, well, huge.
Okay, so before we even get to measuring this thing, the paper jumps into, well, kind of an obvious but surprisingly slippery question.
Yeah.
How do you even define AGI in the first place?
It's a question that's been keeping researchers up at night for, decades, honestly. And the paper does a really good job at looking at some of the classic attempts to define AGI, and it really shows you how tricky it is.
Right. Take the Turing test, for example, that whole "can machine fool you into thinking it's a person" test.
Yeah.
For a long time, passing that was the ultimate goal of AI.
Right.
But this paper really challenges that assumption.
Absolutely. Because think about it. Just because a machine can, mimic conversation, does that really mean it understands what it's saying?
It's like I could probably teach my dog to say, "I want treats." But that doesn't mean she actually gets the concept of language and desire.
Exactly. It's a really subtle point. And the paper takes on another big one, the idea of strong AI, this whole question of whether machines can be truly conscious.
Okay, yeah, that's where things get, deeply philosophical very quickly.
Right. How do you even begin to measure consciousness in something that's not, human?
Makes my brain hurt just thinking about it.
Mine too. But then, to make things even more interesting, these researchers bring up another concept. It's called the coffee test.
The what?
The coffee test.
Yeah.
And it was actually thought up by Steve Wozniak, the Apple guy. Basically, he said, imagine an AI, just your average AI, let loose in a kitchen and told to make a decent cup of coffee.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds kind of, almost funny.
It does. But think about it. Think about all the stuff we take for granted when we make coffee. Navigating a physical space, you've got to recognize objects, understand instructions, even deal with unexpected things.
Like if you run out of filters or something, yeah, my coffee machine can barely handle that.
Exactly. And that's the point. It highlights how many definitions of AGI miss something super important, that physical interaction with the world.
Okay, so they use these examples, the Turing test, strong AI, this whole coffee test thing. They use them to show how complex defining AGI really is. It's not just like checking off a list of skills, right?
Yeah.
It's about something bigger.
Totally. It's about understanding how all those skills, work together, how they manifest in a way that, that at least mirrors human intelligence, maybe even surpasses it eventually.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. So they take all of this and they land on 6 core principles for defining AGI. And some of these are, they really make you think differently about what intelligence even means.
Right. It challenges our assumptions. It's not about, perfectly copying the human brain. It's about evaluating what AI can do.
And that's where things get even more interesting because their definition, it leads to this whole new way of thinking about AGI in levels.
Yeah. They basically gamified intelligence.
Okay, now that is a concept I can get behind. Gamified intelligence. All right, so tell me more. How does that work? So last time we were wrestling with this whole how to define AGI thing, and things got, kind of deep, I'm not going to lie. But the cool thing is these researchers, they actually give us a way to get our hands dirty with this stuff. They lay out a practical framework, which is awesome.
Totally. And it all goes back to those 6 core principles for defining AGI. And what's cool is how those principles directly lead to a way to actually measure progress, which is huge.
Okay, so hit me with it. What's the secret sauce here? What makes a good AGI definition according to these researchers?
Well, one of the principles that really stood out to me was this idea of focusing on potential more than actual deployment in the real world.
Okay, so just because an AI isn't, out there solving climate change or writing the next hit song doesn't mean it couldn't, right?
Exactly. We have to consider an AI's potential impact, even if it's still locked away in a lab somewhere. It's about more than just, like, checking a list of what it can do right now.
That's a really good point. So how do you go from these, kind of abstract principles to actually measuring something as, well, Slippery's AGI? Did they invent like a AGI measuring tape or something?
Not quite a measuring tape. But they do introduce this really interesting concept, levels of AGI. Think of it kind of like, well, leveling up in a video game.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Gamified intelligence. I am here for it. Tell me more.
So imagine like a grid, right? Like a character sheet you'd have in, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons or something. One axis is performance. How good is the AI at a specific task? This goes all the way from like emerging at the low end to, wait for it, superhuman at the high end.
Okay, so from baby steps to like full-on sci-fi. Got it. What about the other axis?
That's generality. Basically, how many different things can the AI do at that level of skill? So from narrow, meaning it's really good at like one very specific thing, to general, which is, well, that's the holy grail of AGI, doing lots of things well.
Okay, so where do most of the AIs we see like right now fit on this map? They're probably all huddled down there in the emerging corner, right?
A lot of them, yeah. Think of like your typical chatbot. It might be pretty good at having the conversation, but ask it to, write a poem or something and you'll quickly see its limits.
Right, right. So that's emerging performance, narrow generality. How do we level up from there?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The jump to competent performance is actually where a lot of the big real-world impacts start to pick in. Like, imagine an AI that can do your taxes, or write basic code, or even, draft a decent marketing email.
Okay, so not exactly mind-blowing stuff, but definitely things that, well, a lot of humans would rather not do if they didn't have to.
Exactly. And that's what makes this framework so useful. It lets us move past those, those vague fears about AI and start asking more specific questions. Like, at what level of performance does AI actually start to, replace human jobs versus just making those jobs easier?
Right. It really makes you think about competence in a whole new way.
Right.
So, okay, what happens as we climb higher up this performance ladder? What does expert-level AI look like?
That's where things get, well, pretty mind-blowing, honestly. An expert-level AI would be like at the very top of its field. Like, imagine an AI doctor who can diagnose diseases with like incredible accuracy, or an AI lawyer who crafts these, airtight legal arguments.
Wow, that is both amazing and also kind of like low-key terrifying. But what's cool is that even at this expert level, we're still talking about AI that's operating within like the realm of what humans can do, right? It's not like exceeding our abilities.
Yeah.
Just matching them, maybe doing them even better in some cases.
Yeah. But it's the next level up where things get really wild. Virtuoso performance. That's where AI starts to do things that honestly we didn't think were possible, like composing music that's, more beautiful than anything a human could create, or designing buildings that just like break all the rules of architecture.
Okay, so now we're talking about AI that doesn't just take our jobs, it's creating whole new categories of jobs that we haven't even imagined yet, which I guess brings us to the final boss level, superhuman performance.
That's the one that really gets the imagination going, right? This is AI that's doing things that are just completely beyond human capabilities. It's sci-fi stuff for now, but it's also, a good reminder that AI development doesn't have like a clear endpoint.
It's a journey, not a destination, as they say. So, okay, we've got this awesome map, this way of visualizing AGI and how it might evolve, but how do you actually test for these different levels? Like, is there an AGI exam I can download somewhere?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's something these researchers really dig into. They say we need to develop what they call benchmarks, basically. Sets of tasks that can accurately assess both an AI's performance and its generality. And this needs to work across all those different levels of AGI.
Okay, so what kind of tasks are we talking about here? I'm picturing like some kind of elaborate obstacle course, but for AI.
It's kind of like that. Think about tasks that really challenge an AI's cognitive abilities. Things like language comprehension, problem solving, even creativity.
But it's not just about what the AI knows, right? It's about how it learns, how it adapts, like those metacognitive skills we were talking about earlier.
Yes, like can the AI tell when it doesn't know something? Can it go out and find new information and actually learn from its mistakes? That stuff's crucial whether you're a human or a machine.
It's like the AI equivalent of realizing you need to Google something before you like make a huge decision. We've all been there. Okay, so we've got this framework for thinking about how to measure AGI, from baby's first steps all the way to like superhuman abilities. But here's the thing. even the smartest, most capable AI isn't operating in a vacuum, right? It's interacting with us, with the real world. And that brings up another really important dimension that the researchers explore, levels of autonomy.
And that's where things get really interesting, especially when we start thinking about like the consequences of all this. It's one thing to have an AI that can solve equations all day long, but it's another thing entirely to give that AI the power to, make decisions that actually impact people's lives.
Okay, so break it down for me. Levels of autonomy. What's the spectrum look like here?
Think of it as this like sliding scale of control. On one end, you've got humans totally in charge. On the other end, the AI is calling all the shots, and then there's everything in between. So at the most basic level, you've got AI as a tool. Like how we use smartphones and computers now, we're the ones in control, using the AI to, make our lives easier or whatever, but we're the ones making the decisions ultimately.
Right, like I can ask my GPS for the fastest route, but I'm the one who decides whether or not to actually take that route.
Exactly. But then as we move along the spectrum, we get to these scenarios where the AI starts taking on more of that decision-making power. Think about those AI-powered medical diagnosis tools. A doctor might use that kind of tool to help them, interpret a scan or whatever, but ultimately, the doctor's still the one who makes the final call on the diagnosis and treatment.
So the AI is like this, like super smart consultant in that scenario, giving advice but not making the final decision.
Exactly. But then it makes you wonder, like, what happens when we get to a point where the AI's expertise actually surpasses that of, even the best human experts? Do we still keep that human in the loop, even if the AI is, demonstrably smarter in that specific area?
Oh, man. Now, that is a question that I'm sure keeps some people up at night. And I feel like the answer probably depends a lot on the situation, right? Like, I might trust an AI to optimize my, I don't know, my website traffic or something, but I'm not sure I'm ready to let it perform brain surgery on me.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating and important. There are no easy answers here, just like this whole bunch of increasingly complex questions that we need to figure out as a society.
And we are just scratching the surface here. We've got those super specific levels of AGI, those thought-provoking levels of autonomy, and now we're going to see how it's all playing out in the real world. And trust me, some of this stuff is straight out of a sci-fi movie. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time, mapping out this whole AGI landscape from those early stages all the way up to superhuman, and, well, things get kind of mind-bending up there. But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. What does all this actually look like in the real world? Like where are we on that whole levels of AGI chart right now?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because it seems like every other day there's a new headline about some AI breakthrough, and it's easy to feel like the future is just like exploding all around us. But the truth is, we're already seeing glimpses of these different AGI levels popping up in some pretty unexpected places.
Okay, so spill the tea. Give me some real-world examples. Where's the AGI hiding in plain sight?
Let's start with something most of us probably use every single day, those AI assistants on our phones and stuff, like Siri or Alexa.
Okay, yeah, I use those all the time.
Right. And they might seem pretty basic on the surface, right? Answering questions, setting timers, playing music. But when you actually think about it, they're already operating at that competent level of performance, and for a surprisingly wide range of tasks, too.
It's true. Like, I remember when those first came out, it was mind-blowing just to get like a coherent answer from a machine. Now I'm like complaining when Siri misinterprets one of my requests.
Exactly. Our expectations have totally shifted. But that's just one small example. Think about the field of medicine. AI is being used right now to analyze medical images, like way better than humans can in some cases. It can spot patterns that doctors might miss. It can even assist with surgery. We're talking about tasks that require like crazy high levels of performance and accuracy, stuff that used to be exclusively in the realm of human expertise.
So we're talking about AI operating at that expert level, maybe even pushing toward virtuoso in some cases. Okay, that's both exciting and also a little bit, makes you think twice about that whole AI doctor thing.
It does, and that's why these levels of autonomy are so important to keep in mind. Just because an AI can perform a task at an expert level, it doesn't automatically mean we should, just hand over the reins completely. We have to figure out how to design these systems so they can collaborate with humans, provide information, make recommendations, but not completely remove human judgment from the equation.
That makes sense, because even with something as like, data-driven as medical diagnosis, there's still that human element, that intuition that comes from years of experience, you know what I mean? Which makes you wonder, how do you even measure that kind of expertise in an AI?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's one of the reasons why those benchmarks we were talking about, those standardized tests for AGI, essentially are so important. If we want to make sure AI is used safely and responsibly, we need a way to accurately assess not just what it can do, but also where its limitations are.
Okay, so I have to ask, because we've been talking about all these different applications, but some of it still sounds a little, well, a little sci-fi, to be honest.
Yeah.
We're talking about AI composing symphonies, designing buildings, maybe even writing the next, like, blockbuster movie. I mean, is that really happening, or is that still way off in the future?
That's the thing about the future, right? It sneaks up on you. And yeah, we're not quite at the point where Spielberg's got competition from an AI director or anything, but we are seeing huge advancements in creative fields, music, architecture, even things like writing poetry. AI is doing some pretty impressive stuff in those areas, and it's only getting better.
Wow, so those virtuoso AIs are already out there, flexing their creative muscles. It kind of makes you wonder, what will it even mean to be an artist or a designer in a world where AI can, like, create art and design stuff that rivals or maybe even surpasses what humans can do?
Yeah, and it's a question that artists and designers are already wrestling with. And it's not just about AI replacing human creativity, but about how they can work together to create completely new forms of art and expression. Imagine AI algorithms helping architects design buildings that are not only beautiful, but also super energy efficient and responsive to the environment.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's like those virtuoso AIs aren't just tools anymore. They're more like creative partners. Okay, I have to admit, the thought of AI reaching those, superhuman levels of performance is still a little, it's a lot to process.
I hear you, and that's exactly why it's so important to remember that we're not just passive observers in all of this. As AI gets more and more powerful, we need to be developing, ethical frameworks, safety protocols, regulatory mechanisms, all that stuff. We got to make sure these technologies are actually aligned with human values.
It's like we need to be thinking about the steering wheel and the brakes, not just how fast this thing can go. Because the future of AGI isn't something that just happens to us, it's something we create.
100%. And it's a future that's being shaped by the choices we're making right now. That means we need to stay informed, ask the tough questions, have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations, because that's how we make sure these technologies are used for good.
Well said. It's been an amazing deep dive into, well, not just what AGI is, but what it could be. And if there's one big takeaway here, is that the future of AGI isn't set in stone. It's like we're writing the story as we go along, and we all have a hand in shaping how it unfolds. So until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.